Thompson is a partner at Hamilton Locke and is often called the Walking, Talking Corporations Act. So it's no surprise she's the go-to person for everything financial services and credit. Jamie joined the fold in 2003. Happy anniversary, 20 years, and has been a partner since 2015, before it merged with Hamilton Locke in 2022. She is the leading Australian expert on the application of financial services and credit regulatory regime and is ranked in the Chamber's Asia Pacific Guide for Financial Services Regulation. Please welcome Jamie. Bridie Olsen is the CEO and co-founder of Giora. This is an ag tech startup where she is building a world for the most profitable way to farms, which is also the greenest, solving a couple of problems there. Since 2016, Bridie has pioneered the application of blockchain technology to agriculture, running the pilot program at Agri Digital and subsequently commercialising this program by founding Giora. Bridie's publications on this topic include Insiro's Data 61 Architecture for Blockchain Applications and for the Food and Agriculture Organisation of the United Nations. Please give Bridie a big hand. And finally, I want you to go absolutely wild for Kate Cooper, the Executive of Digital Assets at National Australia Bank. Give her a big cheer, come on! Woo! She's a change-making pioneer who has been at the forefront of the emergence of Web 2.0 in her role as Head of Social Media for the UK Government. Over the last 7 years, Kate has led innovation at some of Australia's largest financial institutions and is now at the forefront of the next generation of the internet, Web 3 for the NAB. Brilliant panel, over to you. Have fun.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy it.
Let's go. So I know when I first met you both, my absolute first question was, what actually is sustainable finance? So maybe for those in the room who also might not know, Kate, maybe you could give us a quick intro to what it actually is, and maybe even some use cases in the market that you could point us to that will help us to understand.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk use cases, I think, throughout our journey because we've been working closely with Giora on a number of things. But kind of level setting, I guess, you know, depending on who we've got in the room, we might have experts far more superior than I on this space, I'm sure. So, but bringing it back to kind of first principles, really fundamentally, it's all about the integration of ESG aspects into the financial sector. And what's most interesting to me is it's really about balancing those financial returns with positive impact. And I think that for me as, I wouldn't say a career banker, I've only been in banking for 7 years, but it's certainly sustainable finance has given me a real purpose-driven way to engage with financial services. And, you know, for that reason, certainly the pilot we ran with Giora was really interesting. But if we break it down a little bit more, it's a broad church with broad definitions. You might think about it in terms of kind of the rebates and subsidies that are provided by government. I've just had solar panels put on my house, and I've also just bought my first electric vehicle, both of which were heavily subsidised by government, which was definitely a key part of my decision making around doing those two things. So that's kind of one subset, I guess. Secondly is kind of credits and thinking about carbon credits and biodiversity credits. And you may have heard of an initiative that was started at NAB called Carbon Place, which is all about providing a marketplace infrastructure for the trading of carbon credits globally. That initiative is now sponsored by a consortium of, I think we're up to 12 banks globally, headquartered in the UK, and really looking to provide that baseline infrastructure that will allow for carbon credits and eventually biodiversity credits to become a really material part of the financial markets ecosystem, which I think is really interesting. Obviously, there's renewable energy targets as well, which I think are some of the things, again, as consumers, we're probably aware of. And then we come to kind of the more banking side of things. So you can think about it in terms of sustainability-linked loans, which is where loans are tied to sustainability or ESG kind of requirements. And that's probably a lot of what we'll talk about today, because that was at the heart of the POC that we ran. But there's also green bonds, and this is really about providing capital for projects with environmental benefits. And actually NAB was was the first Australian issuer of certified green bond back in 2014. So we've been on this journey for a long time, and since then have issued various climate bond, certified green bonds and mortgage-backed securities in the space. It's an area where we intend to do more, and I won't bang the NAB drum too much, but we have recently appointed our Chief Climate Officer who sits front and centre within our executive leadership group. And so there's a big push, I would say, at NAB in this space. Maybe, I don't know, Bridie, if you've got anything else you'd add to clarify the definition.
I think that was pretty good. I know, Jamie, we're going to head into some of the challenges around it, so I'm happy to hold my tongue for just a second. I feel the immense need, though, up front to make a couple of disclaimers that I know we're in a FinTech room, but I'm just going to take the liberty of assuming that based on everyone being clothed and some people's state today being a little worse for wear, lacking wine and food, that you're all into the end products of an ag supply chain, and I'm going to talk a lot about farmers. So I just think that I know I'm in a FinTech space, but I think we're going to get into some of the detail in a second, and we can talk about how this is actually playing out in ag in particular in a second.
So our byline for today's topic is from fringe concept to mission critical. Why is sustainable finance so important? Bridie, perhaps that's something you could speak to a bit.
Yeah, well, I think that there's obviously those of us who feel the heartstrings pull of sustainability. The fact that you're sitting in a room with sustainability in the title of the panel probably means that we're all one of them. But I run a climate-focused ag tech company backed by ESG mandated investors, and we are making business decisions not based on heartstrings. And so I think that we have to confront the very real scenario that we're in, where we need to be actually talking about the purse strings and the economic incentives here when we're thinking about sustainable finance. And if we kind of zoom into that for a second, the financial reason for us to deliver sustainable finance is absolutely there. I think there's Kate's already jumped into some of these markets and kind of drivers already, but if I start kind of on the farm, the reality for a lot of farmers is that sustainable products are profitable. There's a bunch of farmers I've been chatting with this week who produce a chemical-free canola. They trade it into Costco. They're getting $50 extra a tonne for that product. It only costs them around $10 extra to make that transition over to a chemical-free product. So these are profitable business decisions that farmers are making. It's not just kind of the early adopter farmer anymore who's looking at this. These are like multi-generational farms where we have grandparents or friends of mine who are now talking about transitioning across to more sustainable products. In industries like sugar, companies like Coca-Cola have made claims that they will use sustainable sugar to quantities that exceed total supply of sustainable sugar. So I'm hammering a point here, but this is a profitable business decision that farmers are making, and they need the investment to make that transition. I think the number's like $2.1 trillion additionally each year is required if we want to meet those kind of ESG-linked goals. So that's the first part. And the second part, which I know Kate's mentioned with Carbon Place, is the growth of nature repair markets. I think that that's something that's really interesting when you look at like an ag perspective, diversifying your revenue on farm. If you can trade a biodiversity credit, if you can trade a different type of carbon credit or carbon inset in the kind of Giora world, that's what we focus in on. That's an additional revenue stream. It helps manage your risk better as a business, and it gives you optionality when it comes to looking at how you use your land and use your farm while still achieving an overall better climate outcome. So I guess those are the why sustainable products need to exist, is people really want to access to funding in order to make this transition. And then on the debt side of things, I think that we're just seeing I think it's 80% year on year is the growth in the sustainable linked debt instrument demand, or money going in, sorry. I think it was $1.6 trillion. Kate, you might be able to correct me on this. When I last read that's going into sustainable linked debt instruments annually. That's an enormous amount of money going in. I think that the main thing to think about here, particularly from a tech perspective, is a lot of this comes down to if you can prove impact, and being able to prove impact is so critical here, because we've seen that instances where there is a fraudulent instance found out or an integrity issue around the impact, the value of these products and markets crash, but also the businesses who are offering these products, their brand is heavily impacted. So we have to look down at this from a technical perspective at the data and the real impact.
Maybe if I add to that, I've got some really long words on my iPad that are the NAB response, but actually I'm going to talk about why I think sustainable finance is important from a kind of personal perspective. So I live in Tasmania, which is where I was born, even though I don't sound it. And I had a little farm of my own. It was only a hobby farm with a few sheep and chooks, which I sold recently. And I spend quite a lot of time with the agriculture community, largely through my passion for food, as you can probably tell. And I was at an event at the end of July where it was a Meet the Producers event. And so I travelled up the Tamar Valley and met a pork producer, I met a berry farmer, I met viticulturalists, and I was accompanied by the CFO of a forestry company. And so a really interesting, and then I didn't tell anyone I was a banker, because I would have been booed out of town. But really for me, it was a fun day out, but more than that, it was about hearing from and understanding from the producer's point of view. What are the trade-offs they have to make every day in making their farm as profitable as possible, which in many cases can be really difficult, but at the same time doing what's right for their future generations. And so for me, and they talked about, decisions. There was a agritourism farmer who diversified his farm to tourist shacks and had to make the tough decision about whether he puts another shack on his farm or he plants 40 trees. And, as someone who would not personally, but works in an organisation that would make a decision about which of those we would fund, I could at the very heart see the problem that we're there to solve, which is to help facilitate and enable that particular farmer to do the right thing and plant those 40 trees and provide the infrastructure that allows him to benefit from the carbon credits that come as a result. And so for me, this is about a fundamental change to the system. As a bank, we have the opportunity to do that, but it's also about us representing a signal to the wider market. And in this case, we're talking about agri, and facilitating and influencing the right decisions to be made for, the future of action against, climate change.
Brodie, you mentioned, I think, in your answer about the shortfall in funding that's occurring every year. I might invite you both to comment on this. Maybe Kate, you can start. But what are the barriers in this sector? What's getting in the way?
Yeah, I think again, when I first came across sustainable finance as a concept, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, it was very much, and it's interesting to sit here with Bridie today because the problems were very much about kind of data and data verification and access to kind of reliable proof that what you say has been done, proof that those 40 trees have been planted, versus, you know, the farmer deciding, actually, I'm going to use that money to build my tourist shack, which I'll rent out on Airbnb. And so I think that there's been massive progress with verification of that data, standardization of measuring, reporting, and assessments. And that has been something that we've been really proactively looking and seeking to overcome, which is one of the reasons why, as NAB Ventures, we invested in Giora. But I also think there's probably an awareness and education job that needs to be done further, especially, you know, NAB's heartland is business banking. We're the largest agri-bank in Australia. And so we very much see it as our role to educate all of our customers and provide them with the tools to enable them to actually activate the space. And so that's something, there's an infrastructure role to play here, without a doubt.
Yeah, maybe it would be helpful to know, does anyone in the audience actually work in ag? Okay, so I think that if you look at like the landscape around frameworks and regulation, we talk a lot about that in FinTech, and we hear a lot about that from FinTech organisations. And in ag, where those bodies are dealing with really significant climate challenges and corralling industries that are geographically, you know, dispersed and facing some pretty heavily entrenched problems around lack of digitisation, the conversation around frameworks and standards is probably much further behind where we are in the FinTech world even. And so for a lot of farmers who are looking to access even some of the great products that NAB has, it's hard to make a self-assessment of where they are at and benchmark themselves and understand their own profile and what's available. You know, we work with a bunch of farmers who are doing absolutely awesome things across their properties, but they're not monetizing it at all. They're not sharing that information with their bank, and they're not accessing any benefits off the back of these, you know, literally back-breaking efforts that they're putting into producing really great really great products from the farm and running really sustainable businesses. And so there's a lot of work for the ag industry bodies to come up with really great frameworks, and often the circle of trust around a farmer is really small, and the bank falls into that circle. And so there's an awesome opportunity here to, you know, as NAB is doing, kind of guide the way when it comes to education and help farmers, giving them frameworks and a lot of advice when it comes to products that they can access, and closing that gap between what's happening on farm and innovation in the FinTech and financial services space more broadly.
So one of the problems you just mentioned is data. NAB and Giora have come together with a new initiative, and I think part of what you're trying to solve there is the data problem, and you've brought blockchain into the mix. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Do you want me to start, Kate, and then you can jump on it?
You go for it, yeah.
I should have given another disclaimer. I'm not a software engineer, so I'm not going to get too technical despite some of the words that we might be about to say. I promise I won't. So we're really lucky at Giora. NAB Ventures is one of our investors. We've been working with them since kind of end of 2021, 2022, looking at ways that we can help with our software to provide like real-time reporting and real-time data back into the bank linked to some of their products, particularly in the sustainability space. So the pilot that we ran was looking at a cattle farmer. Her name's Melanie. She's based in Banana in Queensland. She's really, really impressive. She does an awesome number of things on their farm to be more sustainable. She's part of, you know, those industry groups I was just mentioning before, setting like their frameworks and benchmarks for what good production looks like in cattle, and cattle industry in Australia. and she's one of the first recipients of NAB's Agri-Green Loan. So we worked with Melanie to capture a whole lot of data about what she's actually doing on farm. So things that relate to like animal welfare, planting of cover crops to improve like soil carbon capture. And a lot of this information is currently being captured through like on-farm tools. Some of them are really archaic, so my co-founder has a fun time running the tech team and integrating into those systems. But we capture data from a whole lot of these systems that are being used on farm. We bring it back to a single source of truth, which is where the blockchain word comes into things. And we provide Melanie and the leather cattle company with a tool that they can share a profile of that information with NAB. And the purpose of doing that is to provide what was kind of an annual insight into the sustainability outcomes on farm, make that something which can be accessed and provided in real time. So when that information is then passed on to NAB, like that's great in terms of data integrity and ease of kind of reporting data, but it has like a secondary benefit from our perspective at Giora. We can see that this information around like proof of impact linked to the funds that have been invested in Melanie's business by the bank, that becomes really valuable when you're looking at kind of the overall assessment of NAB's investments and NAB's ability to, with integrity and trust, in the actual impact on farm, offer products like green term deposits. So there's this exciting piece of innovation that starts to come together, and a lot of it is facilitated by the network of digital assets, which maybe we can jump into a second, get a bit technical. Do you want to say anything first?
Well, I was just
before we do
saying,
that?
just kind of to say why blockchain, because for us the POC has opened up a whole world of opportunity in the eyes of our bankers, because of the level of immutability, transparency that blockchain technology provides. So whereas the verification of that, for want of a better word, green activity was murky, honestly, and unclear, and as a bank we like to deal with the very tangible. Blockchain's really helped us to have trust in that data. And the pilot that we ran has allowed us to now think about what that might look like from a scalability perspective. So rather than one cattle farmer in Queensland, imagine we applied that to our whole agri loan book, where actually there's no such thing as a green loan. Every loan is linked to obviously both financial goals but sustainability goals, and the impact that can have on augmenting and rewarding the right behaviours that we need to see across our agricultural sector. So that's been, I would say, really powerful, and I've seen light bulb moments go off in bankers' eyes as they've started to get what this means for them.
I think the thing that we find to be like awesome as well for customers who are funneled by a trusted partner into using a digital solution, the farmers then start to see all of the other opportunities available to them. Like this data which they've now pulled together for reporting to NAB is then available to share with a trading partner, so that premium becomes an opportunity, or they can use that information to run a biodiversity assessment within the platform without needing to double into that data somewhere else or fill out a spreadsheet or whatever else. And they can accredit that biodiversity credit with the New South Wales initiative. So there's this like multi-purpose use of these sets of data because of the way that it's structured and stored, that becomes really powerful. And like honestly, farmers are such busy people. The less that we can ask of them when it comes to technology and data entry, the better. And so being able to open up that, I think is super powerful, and it's like another way that those of us who do care as the conscious consumers, we can give back by giving people good digital tools to use that are super multi-purpose and offering them a range of different solutions. Jamie, are we okay to go technical for a second on the digital asset side, or do you want to point us in a different direction?
I think we're just about out of time, but maybe if you could keep it really short, we might squeeze that in.
Yeah, maybe come and if you followed the like early blockchain world of coloured coin, come and find me after and I can share with you a little bit about how this is technically structured to generate coloured money. The reason I think it's really interesting is because part of what we're doing here in bringing together real-world assets with financial products is combining an element of fungibility, which is required for a financial product, with an element of non-fungibility, which is required for proof of impact. So combining those two together, when we think about digital assets, is a super powerful piece of innovation. And yeah, if anyone's interested in geeking out about that, find me after.
I'd like to talk about it at some point. I think, as I said, we are out of time, but maybe just super quickly, maybe both of you could just give me a short insight as to what you think is coming next.
A day, this is my wish, a day where every single financial transaction has transparency and clarity of how that transaction is linked to our sustainability goals, and I can just look in my NAB app, and I can know that my transaction spending, I don't know, $100 today on food and drink has had either a positive or negative impact on the environment, and it transforms my decision making.
Yeah, 100%. I think that would be, particularly from a finance perspective, that's the dream, right? And on the other side for farmers, I really do believe we can build out an economic system here, an incentive model where the most profitable way to farm is the greenest way to farm. And I think that's the future that we're all part of building.
Excellent. Thank you both so much for your insights. This has been a fascinating conversation.